Carolina still needs elite talent in the class of 2025, but you know what? AJ Dybantsa is not the only option.
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Bust out your pumpkins and your scarecrows and your witches, because it's Tuesday, October the 1st, 2024. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shade, and you're joining me at the place to get your Tar Heels content every single day. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you so much for making us your first listen or watch. And I want to give a special shout out to the everydayers joining us, the Locked On Tar Heels Discord members, and our great Locked On Tar Heels insiders. Welcome in, everyone. Let's get after it. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Coming up on the show today, we want to take another look at the elite basketball talent in the class of 2025 and some other options that Carolina does actually have. Got some potentially good news about Kaimon Rucker. Got some continued NIL frustration, but also, gang, for those of you watching, you can see this on YouTube. I am reveling in the fact that my Braves have somehow miraculously made the postseason. They're probably going to get swept right out by the Padres, and you know what? It's all good, because this is the year, given all the injuries my Braves suffered, that to me the win was just making it to the playoffs. It kind of looked like it was not going to happen, because I don't know if you saw that doubleheader on Monday, but the Braves just pooped away a great opportunity to win game one multiple times, and then thankfully won game two, and are heading to San Diego, where they're Cy Young, presumptive Cy Young winner, Chris Sale, will not get to start because it sounds like he's got back spasms that kept him out of Monday. So anyway, the Braves are in the playoffs. I'm happy as a lark right now. This is great. There goes my baseball. I hope I didn't break anything. It is Tuesday, and that means it's time for Tuesday trivia. You guys, from today, October 1st, it is just 34 short days until the tip-off of the college basketball regular season on Monday, November 4th. And that means also the charity exhibitions, or the other exhibition is coming up even sooner than that. It's going to be great. But with that 34 days in mind, our Tuesday trivia is pretty fun. Some 34s for you. You ready? I want you to name for me the 34th leading scorer in Carolina career history and single season history. The same for rebounding. Carolina's 34th leading career rebounder and single season rebounder. And then the same as well for made three-pointers. Carolina's 34th leading made three-pointer career and single season. I don't expect you to get these, but they are names that you will know. I'm just telling you that about all six things. And so the answers for that coming up at the end of the show. Go ahead, guess at it. It'll be fun. So get ready for that. Okay, we talked on Monday's show about what great recruiting momentum it was for Carolina to get Derek Dixon's commitment on Friday, get this a great shooter that they've been looking for, now continuing to wait and watch for the likes of Isaiah Dennis, Braylon Mullins, etc. And the other thing I said is, and that's a great foundational piece in Dixon, but what you've got to do to be able to win at the highest level is get an NBA talent in your class. Think 0405. All that talent they already had. And what do? They bring in this dude named Marvin Williams. Think about the 17 team. They've got Tony Bradley coming off the bench. The 09 team has got a young Tyler Zeller just coming back from injury. You get in these NBA talents, and they help fill in the pieces. And often in this day and age, like, lead the charge in a lot of ways. And so I was advocating for, look, Carolina has to land a tip-top elite NBA level talent in this class. And so I focused on AJ Dybantsa as the most likely candidate, because while he is the guy, the consensus number one at all four of the major recruiting services. He's the dude, and you want him. But I thought more about it on Monday, and I was like, I want to actually circle back around to this, because again, while Dybantsa is the guy, there are other guys that are in that elite 5-star territory, and Carolina still has options with. Now, to be honest and to be fair, Carolina, either on Carolina's part or on the players' part, have already, lost ties to a lot of those guys. And as a reminder, Carolina sent out a whole bunch of scholarship offers at this tip-top level of the class of 2025, and knowing that they're not going to get most, if any of them. That's recruiting, right? You just can't get them all. You don't have space for it. But it's also not just Dybantsa. Now, again, I'm not saying Carolina's like necessarily in the lead or in the best position for Dybantsa, but they're in the game as much seemingly as anyone else right now, and that's about all you can ask for with the number one recruit in the nation. The key guy I want to mention is this. Let's not forget Caleb Wilson. And it's the same kind of thing where his recruitment to me feels so wide open, where there's like all these schools he's interested in, all these visits he's taking. And as a reminder, you can take as many official visits now as you want, and have always been able to take all the unofficial visits, and that's fine. But similar to Dybantsa, I'm like, look, Carolina has what seems to be about as good a shot as anyone right now. And I know it's moved back and forth some if you follow recruiting, but truly, why not? Why can't Carolina land Caleb Wilson? And this dude really, really likes Carolina too. Eric Bossi, who is 247's director, national basketball director, wrote an article about Caleb Wilson this weekend. I had read, and as part of it, just goes through what he enjoys about different schools he's considering. And what he said about Carolina is, quote, "I love UNC." That's more, first off, yes, I'm reading between some lines here, but that is more definitive than you often get. It's like, yeah, their coaches were great. Sure. He says, "I love UNC. I love their culture and I love their fan base. I feel like it would be an opportunity that would be hard to pass up. And I feel like they have a great coach with a great system and culture. And they need another big player to come in and help them next year," end quote. That's just phrased a little bit different than, and I read these all the time because this is what I do, right? He's saying this differently. It would be a hard, and not saying he won't be able to pass it up if there's somewhere else he likes better, but just the fact that we're in his head at that level of like, if I go somewhere other than North Carolina, I'm gonna, oh man, that's gonna be hard to not go and do. I love that. I love that we're in his head that way. That's great news. And to be fair, again, a lot of this is the same language you get from a lot of the high school guys. But the bigger point is that Wilson seems legitimately still in on the Tar Heels. And again, with a wide open recruitment like his, it's all you can ask for. And then you just keep continuing to blaze a trail together along with him and look for that. And, we'll have to watch Atlanta and, to see if he stays home and goes to Georgia Tech, or he speaks very highly of Coach Cal. Maybe he'll go to Arkansas or back to, was just recently at Kentucky. So there's all of that. But here's another interesting fact. Caleb Wilson has been on an official visit to Carolina. And one of the things that Bossi reminds us in his article is that Wilson would like to get back to Carolina on an unofficial visit. And so that's encouraging as well. So all of this to say, I still want to contend, as I said yesterday, for an elite, high level NBA talent type player in the class of 2025. And while I still think Dybantsa is far and away the best option, Caleb Wilson's right there, man. He's very close. And let's not forget that Braylon Mullins, at least at 247, I haven't recently checked out the other three, is a 5-star. He in his own right is this high level, high capacity basketball player, not a forward like Dybantsa, not a forward like Wilson, but is a high level player. And so that in itself is a great possibility. And we got some updates on Mullins on Monday. It's been reported that Carolina staff was in to visit him. Jake Weingarten of Stock Risers tweeted on Monday, UNC's Hubert Davis, head coach, and 2 assistants will be in today for 5-star senior Braylon Mullins. Indiana and UConn had an assistant in last week. And so that's telling in that the other two of his three finalists both had assistants in. Carolina brought in not only two assistants, but also Hubert Davis. Now, it was reported later on Monday that Indiana will have a in-home with him today, Tuesday. Also of note, on Monday, Darius Adams, another five-star kind of shooting guardish type player, committed to UConn. And so while has seemed like Carolina is in third, and that's some of the intel and rumor mill that we've gotten, maybe Adams committing to UConn helps our cause with landing Mullins. And so we'll have to keep an eye on that. Do we move past UConn because of that? And can we Sean May this thing and get this Hoosier boy down to the Tar Heel State? We'll have to wait and see on that. And then another one is, I want to remind us, is that Nate Ament is somebody that is still, in my opinion, a possibility. He's another 6'9" forward. And so they're just all of this to say, I want Dybantsa. Far and away, that's the dude. That's the guy. That's the white whale for 2025. But if you do miss on him, there are other NBA talent options that you can go get and that you need to get to be as successful as you want to be. Well, switching from basketball back to football, the defense had, unfortunately, a lot of difficulty stopping Duke down the stretch on Saturday. But if they had Kaimon Rucker, they might have been in different shape. Well, good news. Defensive reinforcements might be on the way as early as this Saturday. We'll talk about that and more coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about Roy, it's time to highlight our Roy Player of the Week here on Locked On Tar Heels. Roy, by the way, is a new platform that lets fans make contributions directly to their favorite athletes. Download Roy for iOS or Android and enter referral code Locked On, and you'll automatically be entered into a sweepstakes to win $5,000 cash. No purchase necessary, and it's void where prohibited. So this week for our Roy selection here at Locked On Tar Heels, we're going with Power Eccles, because he had a career high in like passes defended, pass breakups, and had 8 total tackles. Just did things beyond the scope of what he's typically asked to do and helped give Carolina a chance and knocked away some balls that legitimately I thought were going to be completions otherwise. And so I'm giving Power $100 on Roy. If you were as impressed as I was with his performance on Saturday, why don't you show some love to just hop on Roy and throw in a few bucks. If everyone pitches in like $10, it adds up fast for Power. So now you have the chance to go show your appreciation for Carolina's stud linebacker and his standout performance this week, as well as what he'll continue to bring to the program. So get off the sidelines and into the NIL game with Roy. On Monday, we always get our press conferences from head coach Mack Brown and both of the coordinators, Jeff Collins and Chip Lindsey. And so I always like to dive in on those and just make sure to see like, hey, what are some of the biggest nuggets when we need to look at that on Tuesday's show? The biggest nugget for me coming at, like, there's a whole bunch of coach speak, of course, about like, how do we fix the things from Saturday? And sure, great, whatever, fine, awesome. The biggest thing for me coming out of Monday's press conferences with Coach Brown, Coach Collins, and Coach Lindsey is the fact that Kaimon Rucker might be back on Saturday. But unfortunately, it sounds like from Coach Brown, and I'll give you his quote here in a second, we might not actually know it until right up close to game time. But Rucker on his own is important enough that if the Butcher had been in the lineup on Saturday, I legitimately think that Carolina is able to hang on to a tight win and beat Duke. It's just he changes things that much. And with all due respect to Tyler Thompson, who has started in his stead, to Jabron Harvey, who has started in his stead, to Jacoby Cowan, who slid over and from a different defensive line position and started in his stead this past week. Yes, there have been 3 different players that have started in Kaimon Rucker's place since he's been gone, meaning 4 different Tar Heels have started at that position in just 5 games. That's wild. So Carolina is just, Coach Collins is just trying to find what he can here, and he's got to get Kaimon Rucker back. Well, and I don't know about you, but like during the Duke game, for example, I just kept thinking, man, if the Butcher was in right now, that play would not have happened. That ball carrier would be on the ground, whatever it was. And look, we've all talked about and seen just how many missed tackles there were, particularly in the second half. I mean, it was just bad. And so now, to that point of needing the butcher, there is an undefeated Pittsburgh team coming to town on Saturday. They need Kaimon Rucker to take care of business. So, what Coach Brown said at the press conference, we haven't gotten the full report yet, so we'll see in the morning, meaning Tuesday, because this was on Monday. Rucker, was running with the trainers yesterday, being Sunday, and looked really good, end quote. Coach Brown went on to say later, we probably won't know until pregame, very honestly, because they will watch him all week. And if he doesn't practice, we can't play him. That's not fair to him or the other players. But if he gets in Wednesday's practice, we have to decide if Thursday's enough because you're not in pads. So we'll just watch it during the week, end quote. So, I mean, it sounds like there is hope, but it sounds like Coach Brown, who is typically a very transparent coach, is not particularly optimistic about Rucker getting in and being ready for this week. I think it really seems like that he could be ready for Georgia Tech next week, correct? Do I have that right in my head? Georgia Tech is next week? Yeah. Pittsburgh, Georgia Tech. And then if you can survive that, maybe beat Pittsburgh and Tech, then you get a week off before you go to Virginia. And that could be very helpful. Oh, by the way, thank you very much. So just got to find a way to get the butcher back in and going, getting some reps. And then you've got that off week to really, really work him back in. So I would imagine if he is able to go this week, if he practices Wednesday, he would be on a snap count. He's not going to be out there full time. He might not even start to that point, or he might start but still be on a pitch or on a snap count. We're just going to have to wait and watch and see what happens. Also on the injury front, and that's clearly like getting Kaimon Rucker back is not just some random thing. That is getting, along with Powell Eccles, like the heart and soul of this defense, and probably right now your most talented defensive player. I'm trying to think if that's accurate, with apologies to the Huzzies and the Eccleses of the world. I think that it's at very least in the conversation. So it's not just getting some random player back, it's getting perhaps the best player on that side of the ball for you. That's critical. Now, sticking on the injury front, but going to the other side of the football, Darwin Barlow, it sounds like, is kind of in the same position as the butcher this week. He's going to be working his way back in, and the coaches and training staff, I should say, will ultimately make a decision about if he's able to go. This one is also critical to me, but in a different way. You're not trying to get your starting running back. And that's good news, because Omarion Hampton is just out here doing Omarion Hampton things game after game after game. But Coach Brown said this as well. I've got to get more reps for more guys. I've got to get Omarion off his feet more, toting the rock a little bit less. I think he's going to hold up, but do we want to risk that? And so right now you've had the luxury of Bullet Goss just stepping in and doing a really solid job as a freshman. But Barlow brings all sorts of capability from his years of experience. We just have barely gotten just a tiny eensy-weensy taste of what Darwin Barlow can bring. I think, because he played in that Minnesota game, but if I remember correctly, he had just like one carry, maybe two. I'm looking back at it. One rushing attempt for 2 yards, one reception for 5. That's where I had that 2 from, one of each. And so that's literally all the production we've gotten out of Darwin Barlow. And so for him, I want him to get back, but also because having those 3 key running backs, man, is going to be so big for Coach Brown to be able to continue to utilize them. Unfortunately, also, by the way, Christian Hamilton, wide receiver, remains out and injured. And if you're looking at the lines, talking about Pitt coming in, Panthers favored by 2.5 right now ahead of this game. I understand that. They're undefeated. Even though they're on the road, they're favored. And so Carolina is going to have to go and take care of that business. So the key offensively for this week, Barlow or no Barlow, you got to keep figuring out what this offense is with Jacoby Criswell. Are we run heavy? Are we pass heavy? Are we complementary? How do we build new and unique offensive sets and schemes around Jacoby Criswell and what he does best? How does he continue to learn more touch on the football? I think there are, particularly because we've seen the ball coming out of Sam Howell and Drake May's hands the last 5 years. We're so used to all these balls having the right touch on them. And Criswell either doesn't have it or is still getting it back. And so we're got to wait to see what's going to happen there. But man, he's got to start landing some of those passes, getting more of those completions. And the staff still has to continue to work with him to figure out, all right, who are we offensively? I don't think we've yet figured out that identity outside of we're Omarion Hampton. Let's ride him. That's a great thing, but there's more that needs to be figured out. So we're going to have to wait and see what that looks like with another sample set on Saturday as Carolina takes on the Pitt Panthers. So last week, a wild scene. We saw an NIL opt-out in the college football realm. And now I want to ask the question, is that going to happen in college basketball? And why on earth does the NCAA try to pretend like none of this is their fault? You ain't kidding nobody, Charlie Baker. We see you. We're going to get to all that conversation coming up in just a second, plus our Tuesday trivia answers. Right after I tell you about FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Guess what? The ACC regular season odds are out for who will be the ACC regular season champion. Duke leads the way, unfortunately, followed by Carolina. Both of those high odds looking, or, low odds, I guess, in terms of what the number itself actually is. And a massive drop off to Wake at plus 850, Miami at plus 1200, Louisville and Clemson plus 1400, Virginia plus 1600, NC State plus 2200, and it just goes on and down from there. So if you want to get in on that action or anything else, maybe getting that 2.5 point line that I talked about with Pitt being favored. Yeah, I think Carolina is not only going to cover that, but win outright on Saturday. And if you do too, go check it out at FanDuel.com. It's America's #1 sportsbook. I'm imagining you followed this storyline last week, but let's just make sure that you saw it because it's the context for the conversation we're about to have. UNLV, which is funny because they've been in the news about one of the teams or schools potentially moving to the new Pac-12. So while that off the field stuff's happening on the field, but also I guess now off the field, their quarterback, Matthew Sluka, is piecing out because of NIL lack of communication. And there's no need for the conversation we're going to have to get into the minutia and the nitty gritty of that whole situation, but it's a little bit jacked up, which is helpful because that then does play back into our conversation. First off, here's what I want to think about is, to my knowledge and to my recollection, this has not happened in college basketball yet. We've not had a player that says, hey, you know what? I don't feel like I'm being honored financially as highly as I ought. I'm out. However, because of this situation, we almost immediately saw a couple other football players do the same. And so I'm almost feeling like certain now that we're going to see it in the college basketball realm as well. So buckle up for that because it's probably going to happen this season in college basketball. And there's a lot of teams in college basketball, 361. It seems like it's bound to happen. Now, here's the other thing. Coming out of a moment like this with Matthew Sluka, the UNLV quarterback, everyone has to start chiming in. So I saw an article on ESPN this weekend that was actually from the AP, and included in it was a discussion of some comments that NCAA President Charlie Baker made dealing with NIL. And I'm going to read this comment, but it boggles my mind that this man's lack of self-awareness to say these things he's saying. Meanwhile, his organization, the NCAA, is the literal root problem of this whole thing. Let me read you the quote from this ESPN article. It says, quote, the president of the NCAA lashed out at, quote, evidence of a dysfunction in today's NIL environment, end quote, while reiterating his desire to see Congress create national guidelines to shape so-called name, image, and likeness endorsement deals that are reshaping college sports, end quote. Are you kidding me with this right now? This statement is so tone deaf. It is so ironic because Charlie Baker, the NCAA president, it's his own institution, the NCAA, that caused this problem in the first place. How is he not seeing that? If his own organization, if the NCAA had gotten out ahead of NIL instead of dragging their feet and being drugged into this whole NIL landscape, we wouldn't be in this mess in the first place. But do you remember what happened? The NCAA was unwilling to look into the future and say, you know, I think our model and our version of amateurism might be on death's doorstep. Perhaps oughtn't we to evaluate and move forward into this name, image, and likeness era? Because it's coming for us. There are states who have already voted to allow their state institutions to pay players name, image, and from a name, image, and likeness standpoint. And the NCAA was never willing to do that. And yet, this is all happening the way it is because they didn't put regulations or guardrails around it in the first place. Had they done so, NIL would certainly have things that needed tweaked and fixed and changed and adjusted. But I feel like we'd be in a much better spot than we are at right now. But no, we can't own our own crap. We're saying, President Charlie Baker, this NIL landscape, it's a little bit messy. Congress, hey, Congress, can you help us here? We're having a little problem controlling the monster we created. It's why? Do you hear me? Do you understand this? I just don't get it. The NCAA, you should have created regulations, and then we wouldn't have to call on the Congress to try to regulate all of this. The fact that college sports now has less regulation than all pro sports, and that the government hasn't stepped in with any regulations, which apparently at this point is Charlie Baker's only hope, is not great. There've got to be guidelines and boundaries coming around this. And in the meantime, the NCAA keeps losing in court. So what do we need? For my money, it's got to be contracts. I think that is, whether or not it is the thing and would bring this all together, it's at least a massive step that would put us in the right place with NIL, where it's not just willy-nilly, right? Like with the UNLV thing, it sounds like a lot of he said, she said. You know what would really help that? If you had some sort of legal document you could go back to and say, see here, you promised this. You didn't live up to those expectations. Boom, see you in court. It's as simple as that. Contracts. Let's make it happen. Now, there's a lot to go into that and a lot of other conversations to have, but it's just a multifaceted thing. A, I think we will see NIL opt-outs in college basketball. B, the NCAA is trying to say, Congress, help us. But you know what, NCAA? You messed this up. This is your fault. And then thirdly, I think a great way to start moving in the right direction would be to utilize some sort of contract system. Let's get moving in that direction. All right, guys, it is Tuesday, and I need to give you these Tuesday trivia answers, and then we're going to get out of here. As a reminder, 34 days from today is the tip of college basketball regular season, at least at the Division I level. So with that in mind, who is the 34th leading scorer in Carolina history from a standpoint of career points scored? Any guesses? It's Donald Williams, 1,492 points. What about the 34th leading single season scorer in Carolina history? That one's a name you know well. It's Lenny Rosenbluth, scored 614 points in the 1955-56 season. What about rebounding for a career? Number 34 on that list? gentleman by the name of Walter Davis, who had 670 boards in his career. What about single season rebounding? Number 34 on the record books. This one's actually a tie between two guys at 33. So it just jumps them to 35. So one of these guys is essentially 34. So that's how we're taking it. And boy, this is Carolina royalty here, just like Lenny Rosenbluth and Donald Williams and Walter Davis. It's a guy named James Worthy in the 1980-81 season and a guy named Tyler Hansbrough in the 06-07 season. Both of them tied in 33rd with 301 rebounds in those seasons. What about career made three-pointers? Who is in 34th on that list? Well, same kind of thing. It's two guys tied at 33. It's Brady Manick, who only had one season, oh, by the way, and Brandon Robinson, B-Rob. Both of those guys were tied with 98 career made threes. Brady did all that, as a reminder, again, in one season. What about single season made threes? Who's 34th on that list? Well, once again, names you're going to know. Rick Fox, 1989 and 90 season, and then Raymond Felton in the national championship season of 04-05. They both made 73s in those respective seasons to get to 30, again, 33rd on that list, but one of them is essentially 34th. That's a fun Tuesday trivia. I enjoyed that one. I hope you did as well. By the way, as we get out of here, such sad news about the passing of Dikembe Mutombo, who, you know, I grew up in Atlanta in that era. And then sad news about Pete Rose as well. And I know Rose, just depending on your age, might be before a lot of your time. Man, go check out the way this dude played the game of baseball. Read his story. And just one of those, yeah, man, it's just hard to know what to do with it. And I know people have very strong opinions. I don't want to get into that now, but I do want to say, man, both of these guys made a major impact on their respective sports. And I'm very grateful for it. And the lives that they lived. Rest in peace, fellas, and the best to your families and those who love you. All right, gang, that's it for today's episode of Locked on Tar Heels. Thanks so much for being here with us. If you haven't subscribed to the show, make sure you do that on audio and video so you don't miss a second of Locked on Tar Heels. If you haven't joined the Locked on Tar Heels Discord, the link is in the show notes. It's absolutely free to join. We'd love to have you as part of that community. Also, you want to go really deep on this thing? You can have one-on-one direct messaging with me. You can have access to all of my stats and data and record books, like where I put this Tuesday trivia together from my own record book, right? If you want to get in on that, join our Locked on Tar Heels Insider. The link for that is also in the show notes. Free 2-week trial, and then just $5 a month after that. A great way to help support our show. All right, you guys, we'll talk again tomorrow. But until then, it's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. Peace.